So it'll be interesting to see where this discussion goes, because I don't remember what we were going to say. So I'm just going to riff and find out what happens. About a month ago, maybe longer, we had posted on the stream that we were going to talk about an idea about the illusion of separateness. And for me, I have a particular mental idea, mental construct of what that looks like and what I mean when I say that. And I come from a couple different angles. Zena had a particularly different angle, as I remember, but I don't remember what it was because we haven't talked about it in so long. So he finally forced us to just put it on the docket and are going to cover it. So
yeah,
I guess, do you want to start?
It started, I think, at one point where I was referencing what Jess has, kind of talked about, or I'll have you explain in a second, with the illusion of separateness, okay? And there's, concept of it in Zen. And I brought it up in terms of, like, dealing with Discord and people on the internet, okay? And, like, how we tend to look at those things, right? And do we feel, how we kind of feel connected or separate from both of those entities versus be that individuals, or this whole, even the whole idea of, like, the internet not being a real thing, right? Or not being the real world, right? Mm-hmm. So those were kind of the context that I was thinking in terms of, and I'll go more into those, but I think you probably want to start with your explanation first and kind of give some of the Zen answer, I think. So, by the way, it's a sneaky Zen segment. Very sneaky.
So, before I actually explain what I mean when I say the illusion of separateness, I want to kind of talk to all the weird atheist lefties out there who immediately turn off the stream the moment the word Zen comes up. I always want to make sure I address y'all mothers, because I want to make sure you're aware of the fact that this has some use to you. There's a utility towards it. The utility of this understanding, from my perspective, is that having a clear and direct view of the way things seem to work, at least from this perspective. I won't say the only perspective, the true perspective. I don't want to get into that thing. From this particular perspective, this particular philosophical notion has utility and merit because it lets you keep in mind things that are talked about in the abstract and actually take them on and own them at an embodied and at a very real level. All right? What that means is that you're not just walking around talking about systems. You understand these systems. You engage with them. You understand that you are a part of those systems, and not just in this abstracted, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism. It's looking at how the choices you make affect these things and trying to make better ones. We talked about this in the last Zen segment where we talked about the notion of training elements, right? One of them was sacred stewardship, the idea that you steward things, whether it be the planet, whether it be economics, whatever it might be that you want to improve or protect or make better. The way that you do that is by clearly outlining what that goal, that directionality is. So when I say the illusion of separateness, what I am talking about is a particular perspective that I have and I experience, and that is, after years of Zen training, years of meditation, and a fuck ton of entheogens, I generally kind of wander around with the feeling of kind of being connected to other people, just a sense of it. There's this thing that I kind of grew up with, and as I've talked to people, they all seem to have it too. There's this perception, and maybe you'll notice it about yourself, maybe you won't, it's fine, that you feel separate from everything. That there's you, and there's the rest of everything else. And you're just separate from all of it. You have moments of intimacy, moments of connection, but there's this feeling of separateness. And that feeling of separateness causes a whole bunch of problems. Because at its worst, it can lead to dehumanizing. That is, if I believe the other person I'm dealing with is some kind of monster or other than human, I can justify all sorts of things. This is what conservatives do to us, right? They look at queer people as otherworldly or these degenerates because they refuse to acknowledge our humanity. People that misgender us are engaging in a form of dehumanizing activity. But separation can do other things besides that egregious example. Separation is that pain you feel at being disconnected from the people you care about, or the things that you engage in, or the ways that you affect the world as a whole. And so what I'm offering is sort of a philosophical understanding that that feeling of separateness, that perception that there's you and everything else, is actually illusory. That there's a construct that you engage with daily that is the ego, the self. If you step back in your mind for a second, if you just take a second and just pay attention, you can kind of get a sense of your own sense of self, right? It's actually in some ways an object in awareness. Despite it being sort of the subjective lens you engage with things you are also, right? You also can step back and kind of go, okay, this is my sense of self. This is Jess. This is Zena, right?
Mm-hmm.
But because of the misinformed way that the ego works, that is, the philosophies we take on can do good or they can do harm. One of the eightfold path is right thinking. The idea in Zen Buddhism, which is that you hold the right philosophical view. Because some views do harm and separate you, and some views keep you disconnected. I would say that one of the things that would be really beneficial for everybody is to recognize that that perception that there's a separation is, by its nature, false. It is because of the arising of the construct of ego or self that there is some sort of separation. Because in reality, this is all together. What do I mean when I say that? I mean that, well, first off, if there's any very far-flung physicists out there, the idea of people who engage in string theory or have read Bell's theorem, you can get into this whole, what the bleep do we know nonsense of everything is sort of connected, yada, yada. I don't really care so much about that. I just care about the fact that all of us seem to be arising in the same universe. You and I are in the same universe as supermassive black holes, the one at the center of the, our Milky Way galaxy. And there are ones that dwarf that one, that make it look like the Earth compared to the sun. There are ones that are so massively heavy that it's so incredibly difficult to see them because they just basically consume everything around them. That's part of this universe. There's something outside the bubble of this universe. There's theories of what that could be because it's exploding outward. But this is all sort of happening. And we're all kind of a part of this thing. There's nothing here that is unnatural. There's nothing here that is separate. And I think when you step out of your own way, you can start recognizing that those connections are there regardless. And then it's just learning to steward those connections appropriately. Proud Platypus in chat said, I like the idea that everything is stardust. I mean, that's actually abundantly true, right? Stars formed, forced helium, or what was it, hydrogen, and I think it was helium. I might be wrong on that one. But I know it forced hydrogen together, and through fusion, created larger, bigger elements. Eventually, those became bigger and bigger ones. Eventually, you get things like metals and things like that. Star eventually goes supernova, bam, shoots out every direction. Then those things, due to gravity, kind of come together. Where do you think planets come from? It's just the never-ending life cycle of stars. It is helium. That's what I thought. And again, I'm not saying this from some weird spirit, overly spiritual mumbo jumbo kind of thing. I'm saying I think the perception of separateness does harm because it starts from the premise that the person in front of me, the thing in front of me, the thing that's happening is not similar to me. It's different than. So when I try to engage with other content creators, for example, I am trying to take into consideration that this is a human being, that this is a person. I might critique someone like, like DGG. Like I can critique those fucks. Or like, LO or anyone like that. And the reality is that I don't start from the premise of they're this horrible, terrible, bad person. I start from the premise of they're a human being who I have disagreements with. Because I don't perceive this separateness. I don't try to create this. In fact, coming back to something, and then I'll pass the torch to Zena. In previous discussions, we've talked about outrage and the way that the mind will try to co-opt through a perception of pseudo-justice and then post hoc justify that movement towards justice. We've seen this with investigations online. We've seen this with hate campaigns. We've seen this with all sorts of stuff. It's been done to a lot of people on the online left by, often, a lot of people on the online left. And what I want to make abundantly clear is that a lot of these things start from the perspective that the other person is other than, and then by perception, almost it is assumed something less than or worse than. There's a meme that floats around online saying, how I sleep knowing that all of my enemies are ontologically evil. This is absolutely toxic thinking. I mean, look at that governor in Utah. He clearly didn't want trans, post hoc justifying a zealotry arc. Exactly, Admiral Paco. That governor decided to try to veto, he failed, but veto a bill that would have harmed kids, and he wanted them to live. What that tells me is that there are political incentives there that push him to certain places. And if we can change those incentives, we might find that we might be able to bring that person over. I'm not the one to, do that, but might be worth a shot. I think that we have to kind of give people credit. And I don't mean in the Jimmy Dore, let's break bread with right-leaning people and try to find commonalities, because there aren't commonalities. They say there are because it's convenient, but when you actually get to the bottom of it, there's a very big difference in the solutions. People on the right tend to like final ones. So, Zena, with that did I kind of outline the premise a little bit?
Yeah, is that kind of what you've got for that, or?
I have a little more, but go ahead with what you're thinking.
Oh, I'm on a slightly different track, because I was going to relate it back to internet stuff, so why don't you finish up?
Got it.
Go a little bit further.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, I think the thing that's really important for me is I think there needs to be consideration before we take action. Like, you are not separate from Twitter. I hate to break that to you. But there's Twitter notifications that are popping up that are specifically built to push at your brain, increase dopamine, and make you want to post more. We are all susceptible to them. If you're neurodiverse, you are super susceptible to them.
Which a lot of us are.
So you take a neurodiverse person who is, by definition, susceptible to notifications, Twitter, and all the bells and whistles, and then you get them mad, you get them upset, and then what happens is that outrage then feeds the algorithm. This is true on Facebook, true on Twitter. Hell, to some degree, it's very freaking true on every social media. As long as there's an algorithm, the algorithm learns and causes these changes. It's one of the reasons why we're making a Mastodon instance, because we don't want this. We don't want algorithms. We don't want something deciding what you see. We just want you to see your feed.
And be able to make better choices about what you do see and what you do interact with.
Yeah. In fact, what I would say is one of the massive reasons why social media is so damaging is because the perception of engaging with it doesn't start from critical thinking and going, okay, there's another person at the other end of this. It starts from reacting. It's realizing that the words on the screen are created by a person, at least hopefully, and trying to understand where they're coming from, trying to, and at least as long as there's clearly evidence to do so, hoping that they're acting in good faith. Now, there are clearly people that don't. There are harassing accounts, zero follower accounts. There are also other content creators, as we're going to learn tonight, who act like asshats. I am not saying this is a uwu spiritual, we take no action, blah, blah, blah. No. What I'm saying is I come from an order that was based on, Rinzai Zen, samurai. And what Junpo used to say very clearly is, this is important. This is life or death. And someone asked him once, hey, what happens if someone breaks in your house? You do whatever you have to shut down the situation. If that means you have to escalate to the point of taking a life in roadblocks, you do so not with hate and rage and all these other things that are reactions to the real feelings. You experience the fear, you experience the hurt and the sadness, you recognize what you had to do in that self-defense circumstance. Right? How we perceive and think about things makes our lives better or worse. This is not a hard concept. It is hard to live as.
Absolutely.
Right? Because the problem is you have to remain mindful. You have to stay present with what you're doing. It means not sending that tweet. When I have been harassed for the last year, I could have easily just posted those things and gone on a rage. Instead, I let it go for a year, and then I started posting a massive thread breaking down the way the systems involved work. Because that's going to be more beneficial to you guys and to me than just lashing out. Is this making sense? Is this following? The idea that separateness can lead to harm, atrocity, offense. Again, I'm not trying to sell you a church. I'm not trying to sell you Jesus will come and pat your bottom. What I'm trying to sell you is the idea that you can be better than this, that you can be considerate. And this is a lifelong practice. This is mindfulness 101. This is learning to stay present. It's to notice the way these things interact. I've said this before in other Zen videos or when I talked about Junpo. People can believe me or not. I don't really wholly care. My experience in the Zendo, my experience with entheogens, the work that I've done in those areas, for me, something fundamentally changed there. I felt like I was an alien from the rest of the world for the longest time. Incredibly alone, incredibly distant, constantly lonely. And then something popped while I was staring at a vacuum while on the phone with my friend Mark, and I ended up not ever experiencing that again. Do I still have loneliness come up? Sure. But it's usually just trauma. It's usually just BPD. I can actually see the button happening. Can't always stop it, but I can see the button happening. But I'm not running from myself like I used to. And that comes from a lot of work. Do I still have work to do with myself? Yeah, I'm going to be doing that till I die. But what I want you guys to understand is that we can be better than this. It's not just about trying to hold everyone else to account and trying to make the world better in that regard. It's also holding yourself to better. What can you do? Right? If every single person in the country just didn't eat meat for one day, I'm not saying don't eat a burger, don't go out to a cute restaurant. What I'm saying is just have a meatless meal for one day a week. We've done the math on this. It's huge. What are you eating? What is the choices you're making about the food you eat? Are you being thoughtful? Do you recognize that life has to die for us to eat? That cycle's really weird. And I'm not just talking about ooh-woo animals. I mean, there always has to be death. Mushrooms, living, at least for the most part. Plants, living. Animals, living. All of these things are living. Hi, Bun. Oh, hi, Mock. You have to kill in order to live. That is literally built into the world. You ever thought about how bizarre that is? How utterly horrifying and yet bizarrely interesting that is, that we're all interconnected in this way? That's such a profound and yet simple concept. You can show that to a kid just by having him watch a lion movie with bad hyena propaganda. So I don't know if I have anything else on this. Something might pop in my brain, but I know you wanted to kind of take this in another direction with the whole technology thing. So go.
Yeah. So being with Jess, definitely pick up some of this stuff. And it's been especially apparent lately that the way I seem to feel or interact with, Discord and the internet does not always feel like what other people do or what I was taught necessarily to do. Because, right, when there's a lot of push for nature, okay? You go out in nature, you do all your spiritual stuff, whatever else. There's a lot of stuff for that. And it almost just demonizes cities. Well, and that can be really problematic, at the very least, because not everybody can just go out to the woods. We live in a place with lots of woods everywhere. There's water everywhere. But not everywhere is like that. Not everybody can just leave the city and up and leave, right? So finding a way to kind of interact and connect with the world around you with what is, I think, is really huge. And And so I guess what's natural, like, if we go back to everything Stardust, like, so is plastic, so is technology, computers, right? All of those things that we don't normally consider natural, well, it's all here in the world with us, right? And so the other big thing that I hear a lot as well is that when we're referring to the internet, you know, we talk about it like it's not real, right? Like, or we have to go back to the real world, right? And that's a weird one. Because if you think about it, like, wait a minute, no, I'm streaming. There are, in fact, other people watching us stream right now. That's also real, right? The connections here are not any less real because they are through the internet. And so there is still, a system of how, those interactions work. That connection is still there. It's just a different format. And so, like, especially when we're dealing with, like, Discord stuff, like, no, I really do see people as individuals. Like, that is a thing. It's not just one big, huge name. It's individual people. So when somebody just goes, is having a conversation with me and then just suddenly yeets and leaves the server, no. Like, I feel that. I notice that. It's not just like, okay, this rando's gone, like, whatever, like, they don't exist anymore. No, it kind of hurts a bit, right? Because somebody just kind of had an interaction, didn't say anything about it, didn't do anything, and just left. And this has happened a number of times, okay? I'm not singling anyone out here. This happens constantly on Discord, and we know that. But it still kind of sucks, right? When people just leave, right? But in order to have that, that feeling there, we kind of have to admit that, no, everybody on this server is an individual person, right? Who's going to show up with, all of their baggage, their fears, their hurts, their joys, right? Everything that they've been through, they will show up into that space with. And so I guess my big thing too is trying to be really mindful of what we bring into a space is really big for me. Like, if I have a big ask, it's that, right? Like, if you're saying something kind of snarky or sarcastic or cranky, like, that moment of going, wait a minute, is this actually helping the space? Is this going to actually, bring something into this that would be positive or good or helpful or something of that nature, right? Versus, like, is this instead going to be really, like, turn into kind of a crappy interaction? So that's where I've been thinking about it, right? And it's funny too, because we'll see people all the time that are like, wait a minute, can I say this thing without getting banned? I see that a lot. I see that at least a few times a week. And it's so weird to me because I couldn't imagine just yeeting somebody out of a space, right? If I see that person as a full individual who is having, interactions and friendships and getting to know other people in that space, I couldn't imagine just yeeting them out of there for silly things, right? Like, that would be kind of devastating unless, right? So we try to save those for really, like, good reasons, okay? Or things where, like, no, we either try to work with people, right? Kind of bring it to their attention. Unless it's something, like, really utterly toxic. Like, if you're just white supremacist all the way, like, no. So again, in order to have that, we kind of have to be in a space where we can see people as individuals. So.
Yeah, I mean...
Looks like you're kind of wanting to go somewhere with this.
Yeah, I was just going back because I was trying to stay in frame. Yeah, I think the thing that comes up for me is that, like, when you join a new Discord, let's say, what do? Are you just focused on joining the Discord, or is there a sort of awareness that you're coming into a new space with new people, that this place has its own way of doing things? It's not just the rules you read when you come in, but it's got its own culture. It's got its own way of doing. When you come into that, how do you engage, right? Do you stay mindful of that and try to understand it and figure it out? Or do you just come in and kind of just start treating it like you would any other Discord? Generally, I find the people that are mindful and try to engage with us in good, in good faith, or in ways where they, like, come in and genuinely want to connect, those people do really well on our server. The people that come in and just kind of want to do debates or think that this is, or think that they could just get into these massive arguments like they see on certain Discords. Like, I just don't want that. I don't want that there. We spend time with the people in our Discord. One of the things that we do that I don't know if everybody else does is, we have somebody who, we had numerous people who have just left our server, who just ran because they got triggered. They had a trauma response. I'll give an example is, this happened literally twice in the last 2 days where, we had one Babu who, had got muted by the thing and by the bot and basically like got really frustrated. And I ended up kind of, chasing him down, talking about in DMs and going, hey, like, you're totally cool to come back. Like, sorry.
Well, and I kind of booped just because we kind of had to go, wait a minute.
Yeah.
Like, what even happened here? Like,
yeah, we didn't realize the bot had gone off because it was during the night. It was like 5 a.m. And so it's like, no, we went over to, go get them. Same thing with like, there was another person who, it was another content creator who was in the server, ended up leaving because they saw someone that they have a very real trigger around, had a really good talk with them, told them they can come back anytime, came to an understanding. I want to do that. It may not always be me that's able to do it as we get bigger, but my goal is I want mods who are willing to, engage and figure out, that these are other people.
Mm-hmm.
It sucks because it takes more time, it takes more effort.
But it does certainly make a challenge when, when you're on like really large servers, with several thousand people, that's a whole lot different than a couple hundred.
Yeah. So coming back to this idea, it's like, they're human beings. They deserve to be cared for. How do my actions reflect my values? We'll be talking about that more tonight, like values, axioms, stuff like that. But how? There are people on the online left who unironically think that they're they want socialism. They want things better. They want people to have healthcare. And they're utter douchebags to everybody, right? Like, think about that. Like, if your goal is to have care in the world, systemic changes so that people can be cared for, to be supported, to have community, to have food, water, shelter, healthcare, but then you wander around being an utter tool, at some point, someone's going to have to point out that this feels disingenuous. I'm not saying it has to be kumbaya and head pats and all that shit. All I'm saying is that when we engage with one another, why can't we just do it and show up? There was a conversation that happened in Heavy before we nuked the channel where we were talking about plural folks, and I wasn't backing down on a topic because I had presented a hypothetical and I wanted it answered. And, it was one of those things where, the person responded and kind of, dumped a whole bunch of stuff. And when I came back from my client and I saw that, I just said, I'm not responding to any of this. Not because I didn't care about that person or wanted to know their perspective. It's that if there's so much stuff there and I get to use my 15 minutes in between clients to do that, it just doesn't feel like a respect of my time. This could have been easily summed up in 2 sentences, right? So it's one of those things where instead of just not responding to the thread, what I said was, yeah, I'm not responding to this. Could you please make this more succinct? This is not appropriate. I am doing this in between work. I don't see other people do that. I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but like, how many times do people in Discords bring up, like, unless they're like really dealing with crisis, bring up like, hey, I'm at work, or hey, I'll respond when I can. Like, it doesn't happen as often as I think it should.
Yeah.
Like, our real lives don't intersect here. And I understand why that is, because the escapism of Discord and online allows you to be as queer as you want and not have to deal necessarily with like shitty parents or people. But still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I did want to clarify when I said it sucks isn't about like going after people. I don't mean that it sucks going after people or interacting, more just I personally find weighing out the emotional energy and like time in a day to do that kind of thing to be a lot sometimes. And that's where I find it to be difficult for me. And that's what I mean by sucky, because it is a lot of time. It does take, a lot of extra work, and I do find it worth it. It's one of those things where like, I really wish that chronic illness and migraines would calm down, because that would leave me with way more time to interact with people and do that sort of thing. But
by the way, super request, if you're on the Discord, if you see Zena typing or being engaged with a topic or something, be super cool to them, because there are days where they just can't like summon the brain power to engage. Like, if you want to do this practice for me as a personal, there are days where my partner, due to brain fog, will just not know how to engage with the stuff going on. One of the ways you do that is you keep the threads from going toxic, because they're anxiety producing when you're in that space. Trust me, when I'm in a migraine, I don't even look at the Discord because it'll fuck with my head. But also just, when you see them engaging, realize that, this is a window for them. Be respectful of their time. That's not saying that you have to, kiss their feet or something like that, but just be aware, be mindful.
Well, and I guess just be a person is always my ask, right? Like, I'm not looking for advice. I'm not looking for, like, some praise or some, like, therapeutic... I'm not looking for praise or therapeutic answers to anything. In fact, like, I've been dealing with this stuff for, like, a decade, okay? Like, I can't go into my whole history with people, and I don't... Like, there was a point where, talking to other migrant folks helped a lot because I could learn a lot of new things and try a lot of stuff that way because I would hear about it from them. But nowadays I'm like, nah, I really don't need that from people. But for me, that's a boundary that I would rather, have people kind of ask me or check in if that's something that I want. At the end of the day, like, I'm a person too, and so just showing up like a person is just so much easier.
I agree. Also, I'll give you last example and then we'll end this segment. Is just, we were in the newcomer chat and we were talking to people and someone asked me the question because they saw me typing. They said, hey, Jess, how do you not get reactive when people are, talking shit about you? And I said, one answer is years of practice. And I think the other thing I said was also I get affected. Depending on the person, depending on the situation, especially the level of like justice or a level of fairness that happens with that situation. Yeah, I get affected.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? I could sit there and be like, I rise above it and I'm beyond it. But no, the last year of seeing someone talk shit about me doesn't feel good because they simultaneously have ignored my partner and basically framed me as this right-leaning monster because I disagree with them on certain political points. And so one of the big things for me is like, I said to this person, like, for me, it's that like being open and honest with you guys about the stuff that I struggle with, like stuff online has affected me negatively. There have been recent stuff that I won't go into where, yeah, it's caused panic attacks, things like that. There have been things where I've been genuinely worried for a friend's well-being and possible like life and safety.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a big one for both of us.
I get affected by the fact that I have people regularly call out, whether it's people that used to like us and then suddenly didn't because their friends didn't, or other people who, just deny it because it's convenient for them for priming. The idea that like my license, my degree don't exist. And again, they're not the end of the world. I can still be wrong. I can still make mistakes. But it's convenient to them to do so, to ignore the accomplishments I had. For you, that may not matter. For me, as a kid that grew up poor enough to be on a DHSS floor playing with a maggot at age 5, to be able to have a master's degree is a big deal to me. Remembering the human about a person sucks because it takes away all that lashing out.
Yep, absolutely.
All that stuff, right? It also means you choose your terms more carefully. I don't just go around calling everyone a fascist. I call people who I think are fascists, and then I demonstrate why their behavior looks like that. So I guess if I can leave you with anything today, and I think this is both me and Zena's point, is just be considerate, stay present, and just attempt, if you would, to remember the person. Remember that none of this stuff is separate, that this illusion of separateness, this idea that the person outside of you is this...
The person outside of you or on the internet?
Or, again, same thing.
Yep.
That person is somehow different or other. I mean, from one perspective, yes, and from another perspective, no. It's all the same.
Mm-hmm.
Y'all motherfuckers need to watch I Heart Huckabees. Anyway.
Yep.
I think that's good. See you in the next one.
Yeah.
If you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Also, consider donating to us. You can support us on our website, transgirltherapist.org. You can also help us on our Patreon, link below, or you can become a member here on YouTube. Thank you so much for watching.